Hi, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about displacing one-time passcodes with Passkeys. My name is Jing. I lead product marketing here at Beyond Identity, and I will be co-presenting with Josh.
Hi, I'm Josh from Yubico. I'm a solutions architect. Jing, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Let's do this. Okay, so what you're seeing here is an overview of one-time passcodes versus passkeys, and we're comparing them based on user experience, security, as well as deployment. I won't belabor the point too much. Many of you are familiar with one-time passcodes as well as passkeys. For purposes of this talk, when we say a one-time passcode, typically that's implemented as a second factor to a password. So just assume that that's the deployment scenario that we're talking about. The key differences between one-time passcodes and passkeys include user experience, in which one-time passcodes require an out-of-band workflow for the end user. So if I'm on a laptop and I need to log in and I'm prompted to have a code, then I need to go grab my second device. And that takes the user out of context for their work, and it can introduce a lot of friction for them. In addition, one-time passcodes face certain deliverability issues since you're reliant on a mobile cell carrier. Passkeys don't have any of those challenges and instead can keep users in their environment using the same kind of method for device login, and provides an optional sync across the user's devices, which can be really helpful in terms of supporting recovery. Both of these are typically pretty familiar user experience patterns for end users. I can't count the number of one-time codes I've received for different consumer services. And of course, with passkeys, it's how we actually authenticate into the devices that we use every day. So OTPs got started as a way for users or for organizations to protect themselves against credential stuffing. The problem is, in recent years, the increase in frequency of MFA bypass attacks has just skyrocketed to the point where NYDFS, as well as CISA, has actually provided regulatory guidance against phishable second factors. And that includes OTPs as well as push notifications. So attackers are constantly trying to get their hands on the second factor any way they know how. And when you send something out of band, that could make it a lot easier for them. Additionally, OTPs are vulnerable to phishing, replay attacks, man in the middle, as well as social engineering. OTPs also do not provide a very high assurance of user identity, and your organization does not manage or have visibility into these devices typically, which is another point of security vulnerability. Passkeys, of course, phishing resistant by default, replay resistant, doesn't require out of band, and this level of security is achieved by the cryptographic challenge and response protocol, and it's scoped to a particular relying party's domain. And last but not least, both are actually fairly easy to deploy. But notably, with one-time passcodes, organizations have to take on a per authentication cost in order to send it out via SMS. And that cost can actually be quite high or prohibitive even in certain scenarios when you have a really big organization or an organization with many applications that you might want to protect with multi-factor authentication. So that really can stack up as an operating cost for your security program. Passkeys do not have that per transaction cost. Is using public-private key cryptography, right? Standards-based global interoperability with almost, if not all, operating systems as well as browsers. And notably, if you're on an airplane, you may have Wi-Fi connection, but you may not have mobile network connectivity. With passkeys, they don't rely on a mobile network, so your users can actually access the applications and data that they need in order to stay productive, even in places where they may have poor cell coverage. And with that, now that I've sang all the praises of passkeys, I'm going to pass it over to Josh to talk about, well, how do I actually get started with this?
Yeah, so one of the things that we looked at when we were putting together this document was a real soup to nuts approach of where to get started and how to be successful. And with any deployment, with any program, with any task like this, it's a large undertaking and you really need to have a plan to succeed. And the way you start that plan is really to start with an inventory of what you have and what you're looking to achieve. Um, When you look at the environments, when you look at the operating systems, when you look at the technologies that your users are using and that they're going to need to authenticate on, make sure you look at things like the OS and the form factor. You know, is this a desktop? Is this a kiosk? Is this a mobile device? Is this a tablet? You also need to take into consideration whether these are single user machines or whether these are shared resources. Your deployment patterns and your login patterns and your monitoring patterns, they're all really going to vary based on the scenario and those use cases that you will be working within. Next, look at the connectivity for the devices that you're trying to bring into the fold and that trying to do this authentication on. Do you have Bluetooth? Do you have access to USB? Is it NFC? Does it simply have a camera? One of the great things about Passkeys and one of the great things about Passkey hybrid transport is that it provides a lot of flexibility. You can use external authenticators, you can use internal authenticators, you can use roaming authenticators, you can do hybrid transport and use a separate device altogether. But in order for your project, in order for your deployment to be successful, you need to understand what's ahead of you at the very beginning. The other thing that we want to call out is look for constraints. There is a human element to this type of authentication and to these models. So understand if folks are going to be wearing gloves or people need to wear masks. That will inhibit biometric proofs, in which case you need to look for other ways to do identity proofing. Look at the environment you're operating under. Do you have a call center? Do you have a factory floor? Is it a shop floor where you've got a mobile restricted environment? You might not want people pulling out their cell phones. At the end of the day, when you take a big picture view of what you're trying to accomplish, you know, figuring out these questions early on really is the key for success. Can we go to the next slide? So following up on that comment before about the different scenarios, we lay out some of the differences in the documents between two of the common patterns that we see, where you've got single user devices and you've got shared devices. With single user devices, you can take advantage of things like synced resident passkeys that live on the device or live in a password manager on the device. You can use that hybrid transport for local, or you can do like local proofing using the biometric sensor or using the face ID of the device itself. With single user devices, you also get a lot of recoverability because you can do a lot of backup via cloud providers. When you move into the shared device space, you're going to want to evaluate external authenticators or roaming authenticators. Those are authenticators that can live with your employee or live with your client and kind of move from machine to place, as opposed to the credentials living within the device itself. Also, think about what your backup plan here is going to look like if you've got a roaming authenticator or if you've got an external authenticator. Again, if it's an external authenticator and it lives on a mobile device, you can use Cloud Sync, which is very useful. It's one of the best features of Passkeys, you know, that recoverability and that survivability. If it's a mobile restricted environment and you need to use some sort of roaming authenticator, make sure you work that into your plan. Make sure you have people understand what the registration process is going to look like in those scenarios. You know, historically, we had little keys that had a number generation on them for those mobile restricted environments. And it's the same situation. It could be a physical device, and just make sure you understand that it is a physical device and it can be lost, and understand what the recoverability or what the replaceability of that looks like. Can we go to the last slide? And really following up on the overall process, the guidance is to start small and then expand. So plan and come up with a very controlled scope of friendly users. Start with your administrators or start with your users that have some technical savvy, and run them through a pilot deployment. Then listen to the feedback. Look at the responses, look at the adoption rate, understand what their hurdles were, and then, like the shampoo bottle says, rinse and repeat. Move on to a larger pilot, have them go through the process, collect their feedback, then go on to another larger group. It's really, you know, drinking the ocean, where you have to do it bit by bit. And yes, you can grow. And as your process matures, you will find more and more successes and get more and more velocity. But starting small, especially with this new technology or this new approach, moving from OTP over to Passkey, is what is going to drive success for your organization.
That's right. And once your hair is clean from the rinsing and the repeating, you want to roll this out for your users, right? So you're ready to do this. And so here's some guidance for that registration experience. First impressions matter. So we divided this up into existing users and new users. So you have recommendations for both. So for existing users, you're going to transition them to this much better way of authenticating, but you still need to properly manage the unknowns in this scenario. And that's where a really clear-cut transition plan communicated through company channels is really helpful, right? You can tell them when they can expect to transition, the support they can expect to receive, as well as the benefits to them. We all log in pretty frequently, and just knowing that you're going to have a better user experience and a better quality of life change can be an impetus for somebody to adopt new technology. In terms of the actual mechanism for enrolling new users, existing users, you can give them a one-time registration link. They already have a valid corporate email, and then they can just go through a self-serve flow. And last but not least, different operating systems, different browsers have varying interfaces when it comes to passkey experiences. So documenting all of that can be really helpful for aligning user expectations, as well as documenting scenarios in which a single user might have multiple passkeys. For example, I have my passkey that I use to authenticate to most of my apps, and then a passkey that I use for my administrative applications, or any scenario in which a single user might have multiple passkeys. It's a good idea to just present the user with what they are expected to see. So now that you've taken care of your existing population, you can think about new users. So for new users, there's this great moment of onboarding that can be really helpful for enrolling into Passkeys. We strongly recommend that Passkey registration be integrated into the onboarding flow so that the new user can start experiencing really smooth and secure authentication right away. Similar to existing users, you can provide a self-serve registration flow. And for both, if you would like additional identity assurance, you could ask for additional factors for this one-time registration event. You could say, hey, give me a code, give me a link, or you could run them even through identity proofing if that's something that you would like to do at your organization. Additionally, if you provide new devices for your new users, you can pre-register passkeys for them before they even start their first day, which is a fantastic sort of getting started experience for new users. Of course, if you're sending out a pre-provisioned device, take care of the security of the distribution process, preaching to the choir, I'm sure. And if you're sending out devices that are not pre-provisioned, you can, of course, enforce additional identity validation flows to make sure that the user is the person for whom the device is intended. And when it comes to introducing new technology, support is really important. So like Josh said, you want to test it, and with a pilot group and with a bigger group, and with every round, you want to optimize the experience based on the feedback. And of course, you can provide in-person or virtual support via office hours, workshops, troubleshooting with teams, troubleshooting with individuals, reminding people that, your team is available to them if they run into any issues is always a good idea.
Great. So the next topic we really looked at was what the login experience looks like and what the login experience is going to mean, what changes users can expect to see. When it comes to handhelds and tablets, passkey support is really well built and really well integrated into the operating system, where it's going to leverage a lot of the local biometrics and ID proofs that users are using. As Jing stated before, a lot of our devices, when we authenticate into our our provider services, or your Google account or your Apple account, based on what type of device you're living on, you're already using passkeys, and you may not be aware of it. So Apple and Google have both done an excellent job really integrating that support into the device and leveraging those patterns, those behaviors that your users are already familiar with. So it does this magic trick where users are being more secure and they are doing better in the realm of authentication, and they're not even aware of it. And that's a win-win. That's really what you want to look for. The next login pattern you can expect to see is your SaaS or your SSO providers. You know, your normal IDPs. What's good is that Passkey is FIDO2, and many SSO providers already support FIDO2. So there's very little configuration that needs to get done on the SSO side, and the login process is going to be very similar. The UX guidelines for desktop and mobile browsers will actually start shining here, and they will start doing autofill, or they'll start doing automated prompting, and users will get used to this experience of, you know, go to your portal, be prompted, provide your identity proof, move forward. SSO portals also provide the most flexibility for your mixed environment use cases. Those are places where you've got, you know, shared devices down on the bottom, or where you've got systems that may not have been built with authentication in mind, but you can always front them with SSO portals. So you can make your legacy applications a little bit more secure by improving that login process. And the last login experience really is shared devices. These are your kiosks. These are your teller terminals. These are your, you know, devices that users need to walk up to and just kind of like tap a button and get it to work. And here we see a lot of opportunity with the hybrid transport, where you can use the external authenticator, scan a QR code, and provide your strong identity proofing and your strong authentication using that mechanism. You can also investigate roaming authenticators, hardware keys, if it's a mobile restricted environment here. Again, you can do NFC, you can do USB, you can do Bluetooth Low Energy. There are lots of opportunities here. And understand what these login processes are going to look like, and make sure they're well documented, and make sure that you are listening to those users in those earlier groups and understanding what hurdles they had and what you can do, and kind of what tips you need to give the next group that comes through to be successful. Can we go to the next slide? Great. So then the last topic that I really have to discuss in this user experience space is all about support and recovery. One of the best things, as I mentioned earlier with passkeys, especially device-bound passkeys, is that they are syncable. So you can take them and you can sync them up to the cloud, and then you can pull those credentials back down to a new device. So if you have an iPhone and you accidentally drop it in a wood chipper, you can go to the Apple Store and buy a new iPhone. It's a little painful. You can do it. And all of your passkeys will sync with your iCloud keychain. So you have that ability to protect against all but the most catastrophic changes. And what that means is, on your support desk, you're going to see a lot less overall support calls. But we know that moving away from passwords and moving to this public-private cryptography for authentication really drives down password reset requests, because people don't have passwords anymore. They don't need to remember these things, and they don't have the problem of, it's Monday morning and I changed my password on Friday and I need to, you know, call to get it reset. So you're going to see a lot of these, you know, everyday password resets calls being reduced. But that doesn't mean that you are going to get off scot-free, unfortunately. You still need to be able to document what different workflows look like, and have your support operations help people through those workflows. You also need to plan for kind of catastrophic events where a user gets locked out of their cloud account, or they lose access to their primary and secondary authenticator. And that's where your re-enrollment processes come in. Re-enrollment processes should not be the weak link in your chain, because when you have a weak link, that's what's going to be exploited. So in the same way you do strong identity proofing during initial registration, you want to make sure you're doing strong identity proofing during your re-enrollment processes or your recovery processes. Work these out, understand that you can't fall back to a lower assurance authenticator to do this, because again, it's where attackers are going to take advantage of things. Last but not least, you want to make sure you build a deactivation process. So if you have that catastrophic event, or if you have the "I lost my key," make sure your support people, make sure your teams know how to unenroll passkeys from accounts. Passkeys are public keys as far as the RP is concerned, and they can be associated and disassociated with accounts. So make sure you document those processes. That's what I've got to say. Jing, why don't you go talk about some of the fun stuff on the admin side?
All right. All right. So we'll close this out with some admin guidance, because as the old saying goes, what you can measure, you can improve. So in the spirit of improvement, you are strongly encouraged to monitor metrics that we've divided up into 4 categories. And I will say, these are metrics that you can keep an eye on because it helps you measure the health of your adoption, or they're, win metrics, right? You could go to your team, go to your executives, go to other teams and say, here, look at the impact that my team has driven with this transition. So just keep that in mind that, these can really serve multiple purposes. So the first category is adoption metrics. This measures how well users are actually able to get started with passkeys. Some of these suggested metrics include: how long did it take them to register their first passkey? How many passkey registrations are happening every day, every week, every month? And is that on par with your expectations? And then, of course, a global view at what percentage of users are actually authenticating with passkeys. The next category is user success. So once users adopt the passkeys, are they successful with them? So some things to look at here include authentication success rate using passkeys and time to authentication success. In fact, I'm pretty sure Google recently published a report looking at over 1 million passkey authentications and found that passkeys were 4 times more successful and twice as fast as passwords. So that is a great metric. I hope you see that at your organization as well. And of course, this can measure the health of your adoption, as well as something to celebrate as a team, because more successful authentications, faster, more secure, is a great outcome for any organization. And then, of course, user success, you can look at authentication frequency or changes in auth patterns. Sometimes they can indicate issues with friction or user confusion. The third category is security. So some metrics to look at here include device location at time of registration, and is that where you expect that device to be? And if you choose to have additional user validation methods for initial registration, what are the methods that were used, and is that expected? And last but not least, how many passkeys are associated with each account? So generally, the number of passkeys with a user account should be pretty close to the number of devices that a user has. If you use an Android phone with a Windows laptop, you might expect to see 2-3 passkeys. If I walked in here with Android phone, Windows laptop, and I had 10 passkeys, you might investigate that and say, well, what's going on here? And maybe deactivate some of the passkeys that are excessive. So lastly, we have administrative metrics. So these include unusual changes or decline in authentication events that should signal that something is going wrong and cause for investigation. And then, of course, you should keep an eye that your invocation methods are still functional even after your system upgrades. All right. And with that, thank you so much for your time. Our paper will be published in the next few weeks, and you can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. Reach out if you have questions.
And you can find me on LinkedIn or Mastodon, and I would be happy to chat about any of these topics.
Thank you, Josh and Jing. And I'm super happy to have Josh here with us for some questions. Jing's actually hosting a developer workshop on Passkeys in a few minutes, so she wasn't able to join us. But that was a great session. So, Josh, I've got to ask you the obvious question, which is, have you ever dropped your phone into a wood chipper?
I have not dropped my phone into a wood chipper, but we tried to brainstorm the most catastrophic event, and that was a fun one.
No, that was like, I remember that. I'll always remember that. That's a good one. That is like, the phone is not going to be redeemable after that. I had to ask. So the one of the things that you brought up around shared workstations, just there's some questions in here just regarding the specs involved with passkeys. And let's say you decided that you were going to roll out some synced passkeys and also leverage device-bound passkeys to some extent in some environments or to some users. What does that like practically look like from like what kind of like work has to be done in the back, but also what does that look like for like provisioning purposes if you wanted to go that way?
Sure. So with device-bound passkeys that are living on the hardware itself, um, it's really just a matter of making sure that you're using like the strong inbuilt identity proofing on the platform, be it biometric or be it some other mechanism. A lot of this functionality is built into the operating system, and so the actual on-device management of those resources is fairly easy. Um, it's on the RP in the back end that you really need to monitor where your keys are associated with users and where your like how many keys you actually have active for each user. Again, like Jing said, if you see a user that's got like 10 keys, something is going wrong and that needs to be investigated. Especially in those kind of roaming shared device situations, we do recommend like a hybrid model where you have a phone or a hardware authenticator that you're using that you can either plug in or tap or do some other type of proof, and leverage that simply because the shared workstation or the kiosk generally isn't as secure. And so you want to make sure you're abstracting your security mechanisms. And the best way to do that is really to leverage a lot of the new capabilities that passkeys bring about, especially with cross-device authentication.
Yeah, thank you. That's super helpful. Because I think that sometimes because passkeys are sort of a relatively new term for discoverable FIDO credentials, that sometimes gets lost in the weeds that these are just they're WebAuthn credentials. So these
Yeah.
things are based on FIDO 2, and these things are natively supported in browsers and operating systems. We just had like some questions about that. Is there so the parts about benefits of OTP, benefits of passkeys over SMS OTPs? I mean, is there any scenario where we would say, hey, stick with the SMS OTP?
It is for SMS OTP, I really can't think of a good scenario where you'd stick with it. If you were looking at other OTP mechanisms, there are arguments for other OTP mechanisms. SMS is just so rife with problems, so rife with issues, SIM swapping, T9 attacks. They go on and on and on. There's a per cost issue here. We looked at the Twitter decision a few months ago, and that was based on the fact that entities were registering phone numbers and then spamming like spamming SMS messages so that they could collect income on that. So there is a material cost to SMS that doesn't exist with other TOTP mechanisms. Obviously, you want to go with the strongest mechanism, which is why we like WebAuthn. there are odd situations where like a TOTP may work, and a TOTP that is device bound, again, in an authenticator app or something like that. You can have those use cases. When you are asking yourself that question, really dig in to why you need to do that, and monitor the behavior of users a little bit more. Like if you normally see users sign in with passkey and then they switch to like OTP for some reason, investigate that as an incident or investigate that as a, as an opportunity.
Yeah, I think that the per cost, that maybe doesn't get, the per SMS cost doesn't get talked about that much. We also don't get, it's hard to get organizations to sort of divulge, numbers when it comes to that. But we did have, so NHS deployed FIDO, and I have to dig up the case study, but they actually did report like thousands upon thousands of pounds savings per day,
Yeah.
just by getting rid of SMS OTP. I mean, that in and of itself is a selling, that's the, there you go, right? And then you get the phishing resistance, right? So I think that, and I'll find that number and send it out to everybody. But that was sort of like a wake up thing for me, because we talk about that in terms of, we talk about like the phishing resistance and, the phishability of SMS, but less about the costs. And like there are real hard costs associated with this. So that's a really good point. Let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
Just because you're with Yubico, I'll just ask you this because I have you. If you're just like so this is on an SMS OTP to Passkeys question, but if you're like if you're a security key only rollout in your organizations and you want to maybe support Passkeys, synced Passkeys, and this is sort of like almost the same question as the one before, but a little bit like, okay, you're a FIDO2 shop, what do you need to do to enable Passkeys that are synced? How would you recommend going about that?
So we touch on this in the document itself. And I think that a lot of the work that the enterprise deployment group really has done in this space touches on this. But if you're a FIDO2 shop already, you're using Passkeys. Generally speaking, there's very little that you need to do to allow platform authenticators or allow those other authenticator types, especially if you're using like a third-party RP or SSO. If you're running your own RP, or if you're doing that yourself, there's just a couple of flags you need to change in your settings, and those other passkeys will work. And 9 times out of 10, I think they're probably already configured that way without most entities knowing it. So the overhead to move from a security key only model to a kind of multi-authenticator model is very low. One of the items that you do need to watch out for is the attestation flags. Because in a lot of the platform authenticators, attestation isn't quite there yet. And again, this kind of gets into more of the high assurance use cases, medium assurance use cases.
Right.
But the attestable certificates just aren't present on those external on the syncable credentials. And because of that, if you have those capabilities enabled, you'll see some headaches, or you'll see some failures in your authentication workflows. And that's kind of by design. Like the attestation capabilities of Passkey and the attestation capabilities of FIDO are there so that you can be assured that the device that is being used as an authenticator is the device you expect it to be.
Right. And we'll, to your point, we'll be getting into that a bit more when we do the sessions around moderate to high assurance use cases. So thanks so much for being with us, Josh. We're just going to head into the next session with WinMagic, and we'll see you back here in just a moment.
Enjoy, everybody.